This is a CBC News special presentation.
Two airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country.
There's the plane, you can't miss that.
We owe our Canadian neighbors a debt of gratitude for helping us as we redirected.
You ought to be so proud of everybody here. We're so thankful.
How many are you making breakfast for? Approximately 300. So we're trying to do the best we can.
The effort of people down there put into it.
I think it's fantastic. The amount of food we have here is unreal. I mean, people have been supporting from all over, from Lewisport, Botwood, various places around the loop, and that food is just coming in. It's amazing, the response that we're getting.
But our plates are never empty. Lord, they're feeding us again. 1,000 miles away from home, we're waiting for a plane.
The stuff that's on television now, being the worst of what we're capable of, and then coming here and seeing the best of what we're capable of in this place is just so amazing.
Welcome to the Gander International Airport for our special coverage of 9/11 20 years later. I'm Anthony Germain. Well, this is the place where 38 planes were diverted, more than 6,000 passengers processed through here, even though there was only one single immigration customs officer on duty that day. A horrible day for the United States from the images you just saw, but also a story of humanity here in Gander. And it's not just in Gander. From Vancouver to St. John's, more than 220 flights diverted and almost 30,000 nervous, uncertain passengers. Now, I have two people from Gander with me, Brian Mosier and Gina Brown. So, Brian, maybe I'll start with you. What were you doing? We all think about what we were doing back 20 years ago. Where were you?
I was a high school media teacher at Gander Collegiate, just starting my second week of the school year, something usually broke in the media program at that point in time, fixing a bad audio cable. I thought that was my biggest problem, my biggest hiccup for the day. Little did I know until I turned on live TV to test it out and saw the North Tower that things were about to get very, very different, and the next 24 hours, and especially the next 5 days through community television, would be days that I couldn't even dream.
A remarkable way to really figure out what was actually happening. Gina, tell me about your story.
I was different. I was a brand new mom, 2.5-year-old and a 6-month-old. My husband's an air traffic controller, and he kind of looked at me and he said, the airspace is closed. We have dozens of airplanes coming to Gander. We knew what was happening in New York, but we didn't understand how it was going to impact us. And it wasn't long after I saw this elderly couple walking down the street, and I went running out, and I was like, are you plane people? And they were like, yeah, do you want to come into the house? They were like, no, we're good, we're fine. And he explained that they had just come back from Limerick Island. His wife wanted to be there one more time before she passed away. And he said, do you know where I'm from? I said, no. He said, I was 13 when I left Newfoundland. I'm back home. I've always wanted to come back to Newfoundland. And he said, here I am.
Amazing. What a strange way to actually make it back home. Now, for me, I was actually working in Parliament Hill as a correspondent covering national defense and transportation. And we didn't know it at the time, but Washington and Ottawa were making some major decisions. And that certainly affected the day for one person here. Bruce Terrace was up in a control tower just above us.
It's hard to believe 20 years.
It is very hard to believe it's 20 years.
Walk me through what happened when you arrived here that morning 20 years ago.
It was a pretty slow morning. It was a beautiful day. We had a group that normally met at 10:30 every morning for coffee, and I was on my way down to that when I got a phone call from one of my counterparts in Ottawa saying that an aircraft had hit the World Trade Center. So I went down and told the group that I wasn't going to make coffee. An aircraft had hit the World Trade Center. I was going to go back upstairs and follow it. And by the time I got back upstairs, the second aircraft had hit the World Trade Center. And shortly after, the Americans closed their airspace, Canada closed their airspace, and everybody started coming in here.
So I gather as the day unfolded, Gander itself had a lot of people to absorb, right?
Well, by the numbers, I think the population of the town went up by about 60% in about 2 hours. So once we get all these aircraft on the ground, now what do we do with all the people?
And how quickly did that all come together?
That came together in a matter of hours. Like it was amazing to me at the time, and when I look back on it, it still is amazing just how fast that happened. And some of the things that happened that day were, like, at the time, the school bus drivers, for example, were all on strike. So everybody was concerned because how do you move 6,000 people if you don't have buses? And at one point, I remember getting a phone call in the tower from the airport authorities office saying, like, what are we going to do for buses? And I said, I don't know what you mean. There's buses lined up on the road coming down to the airport as far back as you can see. The bus drivers had immediately realized that they were going to be needed up here, and because of that, they left the picket line, got their school buses, and come up here and lined up waiting to start transporting passengers.
Now, I know that you have quite a few stories in and around 9/11. You encountered a guy at the rental car spot.
I was walking through the terminal building. There was a gentleman there from the U.S. who was insisting that he be allowed to rent a car to drive home. 9/11 happened on a Tuesday, and he had a business meeting in Chicago, and I can't remember if it was Thursday afternoon or Friday morning, and he was insistent that he be allowed to rent a car to drive home. And they didn't seem to get across to him that A, they weren't going to allow him to leave, but I don't really know that they could stop him from leaving if he really wanted to, but I just said to him, like, how about I give you directions on how to get from here to Chicago? And he kind of looked at me funny, and he said, okay. I said, well, you go about 1.5 miles up the road and make a left turn. Then you go another 1.5 miles and you make a right turn. And then you go 500 miles and sit in line up for a couple hours. And then you get on a big boat for 6 hours. And then once you get off the boat, you drive for another 12 hours. And now you're in Maine. So the only way you're getting to Chicago out of here by Friday is if you go out in an aircraft. As it was, I don't know if he made his meeting or not.
I guess there must have been a number of people who, here I am in this place called Gander, with no idea really where they were situated, right?
There was lineups everywhere in town for every possible payphone or means of communication to communicate with loved ones and stuff. A lot of the airlines didn't even know, I don't think, in the early hours, which aircraft went where.
Really?
Yeah.
That seems kind of chaotic, because I just assume you guys are always tracking every aircraft. You know exactly where they are.
We, as air traffic control, we're tracking every aircraft. We know where they all are, but the communications with the airlines was not as satellite-based and stuff as it is now. So in a lot of cases, some of the smaller airlines, I don't think, had the ability to communicate where they were.
Right, so they could have planes here and not know that they were actually here. How proud are you as a Newfoundlander about how the province and different communities like Gander responded to the events 20 years ago?
I don't think what went on here would have happened anywhere else in the world. And I have to qualify by saying that, like, for example, Halifax took more aircraft than Gander did, but I don't know that in Halifax anybody ever ended up billeted or in anyone's private accommodations. I think the story is how the community came together and got behind the whole emergency event and did everything that they could for the passengers that were stranded here. And it makes you proud to hear of the way that was done. From an air traffic control point of view, it's probably something that's never going to happen again. Hopefully never going to happen again. That we end up shutting down, airspace in North America. And the strongest memory I have of it is walking outside the night that it was the night of 9/11, and there was all these aircraft parked here, and it was just so completely quiet. It was just, there was no aircraft overhead, there was no engines running, it was just completely quiet. It's very strange to think about the fact that it was 20 years ago. There's people, graduating high school now, that's a historic event too. It makes me feel old, but...
Me too.
And we'll be meeting some people who weren't born when 9/11 happened. And one of the things Bruce mentioned was the planes are parked nose to tail because people didn't know if there were more hijackers possibly coming. It was absolute chaos. Now, Gina, you mentioned your husband worked in air traffic control. What do you think about when you hear what Bruce remembers?
It speaks to me at the incredible qualifications and training that these men and women undergo to be able to handle that kind of stress. That that communication that took place between all of the sectors within the air traffic control, the tower, but also the grounds crews, the refueling trucks, all these things came together in this seamless way that they never could have imagined with so few people there at the time. It speaks volumes as to what they're capable of.
And one of the things Bruce also mentioned in that interview was that landing them was one thing, but a few days later actually finding a way to get them back to home was another logistical problem. Brian, when you see what Bruce remembers, what comes through your mind?
Just how well oiled the entire machine was that got this 5 days to transpire. Everybody pulled into one direction. We had people land here in the middle of the night who 14 hours later didn't know where they were or why they were here. Remember, 20 years ago, these things in your pocket that you can learn everything about the world on didn't exist. And so many people kicked in to comfort people, make sure they were fed, and it all pulled in the one direction. And what an amazing end result we had here in town.
Now, just looking about the logistics alone were a big consideration, and people forget that there was a lot that could have gone wrong in everything that was happening here 20 years ago today. If you think about it, as Bruce said, 6,500 people. Gander had fewer than 10,000 people, so the population more than doubled in about 3.5 hours. So how did they make sure that everything actually worked as smoothly as Gina and Brian have said? Well, it all depended on generosity of volunteers.
Hi, my name is Betty Mullally Moulton, and I'm from Gander, Newfoundland. September the 11th, I was a social worker working with the Military Family Resource Centre and 9-Wing Gander. I guess the biggest understanding for me was the level of cooperation and the level of preparedness that was exhibited that day. And I think that it's important to realise that this level of preparedness was something that had been accumulated for decades in Gander, from airplane crashes where we developed systems such as the emergency operations centres that would be activated at the airport. We built up our partnerships and we built the capacity to respond to any large-scale emergency. Between the mid-80s to the early 90s, there were thousands of refugees who came into Gander.
We're coming to Canada.
We were the first point of entry from Europe.
You want to see an immigration officer?
These refugees were from countries that spoke different languages than what we did. They had different cultural backgrounds, they had different religious ideologies, but they were greeted in such a respected and caring manner. And I think that's important for people to recognise. There was always a community capacity that was built over decades that allowed us to not only welcome and provide kindness and caring and social integration, but also to coordinate a large-scale response in a very short time frame.
Welcome back to Connecting Through Gander, our special coverage of 9/11 20 years later. I'm Anthony Germain. It's difficult not to think back 2 decades and remember the horror and the sorrow and the grief from everything that was lost on that day. But in the aftermath of destruction, 2 strangers managed to find a life of happiness. He was an oil industry worker heading to Houston from the UK, and she was a mom from Texas who was heading back after visiting her son. They were put in the nearby town of Gambo for 5 days, and 20 years later, Nick and Diane Marzin join me now from Houston. Nick, let me start with you. How did you two become a couple?
We were confronted with this looping news, which was distressing to look at. So another couple, and I latched onto Diane because we were on the same flight and so forth. Another couple and us, we decided to go for a walk and discover what was around. And the other couple, the lady had sandals and the gravel got in her feet, so they turned back. And we carried on, and we spent the rest of the day chatting because we come from very, very different backgrounds. Yeah. And so we had a lot of things to talk about.
Yeah.
At what point did it become clear that there was a relationship here happening and then a marriage?
It over the course of those few days, it grew slowly. Right. But we've been taken care of, having fed us and given us somewhere to sleep. Those wonderful Newfoundlanders started entertaining us, and there was a screeching ceremony the one evening, and that's where lightheartedly Diane had offered to marry me.
Well, the master
yeah.
of ceremonies thought we were married because we'd been sitting together and chatting and such.
So when he found out we weren't married, he said, "Well, I'm a justice of the peace. Or, would you like to be married?" And Diane lightheartedly went, "Well, why not?
Why not?"
And I'm thinking, well, you know, that might work. I don't know.
Well, we were in a place that was heaven. We were taken out of these troubled skies, and we landed on an island in a town with so many wonderful people, and they were doing everything they could. They brought food from their pantries, from their refrigerators to feed us those first couple of days. They sent lunches out to the plane while we were still on it, diapers for the babies, formula. They were just taking care of all of our earthly needs.
Now, I understand you have both come back to Newfoundland a number of times to remember your honeymoon, celebrate your anniversary, and I'm told you have seen Come From Away how many times?
118.
118?
Yes. And when people look at us thinking, well, you know, we know now they're crazy. Diane's response to that is that it's kind of like we're renewing our vows every time we see it.
Yeah, yeah. It takes us back to that happy time. Not that we're not happy now, but it takes us back to that first rush of feelings for someone. And so many couples come up to us after the show from the audience, and it has taken them back to that time when they met their special someone.
Yeah. Yes.
It reminds you of love, and I think the love flowed from those people who were like angels taking care of us.
Well, finally, I would like both of you to settle an age-old question here for everybody watching in Canada about destiny. Diane, you were in your 60s. Nick, you were in your 50s. Was what happened 20 years ago, was that fate?
Oh, I definitely,
we believe so.
Yeah, I definitely think so.
Diane having to kiss me on the school bus going back to the airport. I'd probably still be in England now.
I figured that was my last chance because we were going back to the airport to fly to Houston. We were never going to see each other again.
So she played her ace.
Yes, I played my ace card.
I see. Well, Diane, you must be one heck of a kisser. Listen, it's been a pleasure talking to both of you. Thank you for sharing such a wonderful story during such a dark time. Really appreciate that. It's really extraordinary. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
So Nick kisses a cod, kisses Diane, and then the rest is history. I want to ask you both a question about the relationships that were founded in those intense 5 days here. What kinds of relationships are you aware of, Gina?
For me, it wasn't so much the relationships I formed at 9/11. It was the ones that I've subsequently have the fortune of being a part of. We've had so many people come here from all over the world as a result of what happened here. We have had people come here from various museums commemorating 9/11, people with PTSD, first responders, and they're in pain. And they're coming to Gander and the surrounding areas because it's almost a healing. One woman said to me, I had to come here because I had to touch love. And so there's this kind of relationship that you build with these people as they try to connect with you, and those are the relationships I have the pleasure of having now.
And sort of, you know what happened to so many first responders in the United States, in New York and in Washington, that horrible day. Brian, you must know of some people as an educator who keep coming back.
They do, and people want to come back to where they were. They were close to each other over those days, and they were, in a high school you'd have 400 and something people. In the elementary school here you had almost 700, I think over 700. So you get to know each other really well, and people have come back, and it's coming back to the people that they feel that they really connected with over those 5 days. And the relationships are there, they're strong, and it's from the comfort and love.
And I guess, as you're actually together, eating together in a place, in this island in the middle of the Atlantic you know nothing about, must be a lot of curiosity, you ask a lot of questions, and you make friendships.
You do.
Right. All right, now, one of the interesting things that happened, of course, 20 years ago was we know there were a lot of Americans who were here, and there were also people from many different countries, from just about every continent, almost 95 people, or people from 95 different countries, rather. And some people will tell you that people in Newfoundland Labrador speak English slightly differently, and sometimes not everybody understands what's being said. Well, you can imagine with so many people whose English wasn't their first language, language was something of a challenge.
Hi, my name is Sheila Coates. On September 11th, I was living in Appleton in central Newfoundland. The passengers on those flights were not necessarily all Americans. In fact, for several that we had at the hall, English wasn't their first language. For some of them, it wasn't a language that they had any facility in at all. There was one man, the guy in the white shirt. Again, I have no idea what his name was. 40-ish man, and you know, he seemed to be sort of wandering around on his own as well. And of course, I'm trying to communicate with him, and it's not happening. He's just smiling and nodding at me. I remembered a family in Gander who had immigrated here post-war. He had worked at the airport. So I asked Mr. Manco if he could come out to Appleton, just cold called him. I asked Mr. Manco, could you speak to him? Could you try to say hi? And he did. And this gentleman, his eyes lit up. I mean, I have shivers even still thinking about that moment. And they reached out and held each other's hands for the longest time. And like he was talking to somebody who knew everything he was saying. From that moment on, every time he saw me, he put his hand up on his heart. He was over watching another couple gentlemen play chess. So I ran to a friend's house and got a chess board. And of course, the night that they all left, they had the windows down on the bus and the rain was pouring over the windows, and the last thing that I can think from that night was that gentleman from Northern Europe on the bus with his hand up on his chest saying goodbye to me. And I remember after the last bus left, we came back in the hall and we all sat here. And we just hugged each other and cried.
I'm Anthony Germain, welcome back. Well, not far from this international airport, you'll find all kinds of statues of aircraft, as well as old aircraft that are positioned in interesting places and a museum. Now, in Newfoundland, when something big happens, one of two things happens. A great singer comes up and writes a song about it, or B, a very clever artist decides an interesting way to commemorate it. Have a look.
Since I started making public art, so about 5 years ago, I have seen there's many wire planes around Gander because of course it's an aviation town. I've seen those planes and I have said, you know, I'd really love to get my hands and my yarn on those. This year the anniversary came up, or was coming up, and I thought that it would just be a great opportunity to work with the town to offer something different. So I'm using doilies. I'm going to string, for every doily I'll attach probably 6 to 12 strings, and then I'll be able to affix them and tie them on to the sculpture of the plane. It'll be very reminiscent of spider webs. So, you know, the idea behind it all is that there's a web of connections that was made through all these people who came to Gander at that time, but then there's also the web of the community that embrace them during that. I think it's important for art to be accessible, so I think this is an event where we're caught up in the storm of COVID and distancing and difficulty being around one another, but this is an opportunity for everybody in town to celebrate the history of Gander in general as like an aviation community, but also the warmth and hospitality that they brought to the world when everyone was really frightened. It was such a scary time, you know, and they're like in the moment, nobody knew really what was happening, but it's pretty amazing the kindness that was rolled out to people in Gander. That's the sort of stuff that I was thinking about in wanting to make a public art display.
Now, Nina's work was designed to actually show the connections, and as we discussed, Gina and Brian, you had these intense connections for 5 days, and then all of a sudden, people were gone. What was that like?
It was an incredible time, and as has been referred to, it wasn't just Gander. They came to Gander, but they went to Gambo, Appleton, Glenwood, North Arm.
Important point.
Lewisport. And there was this energy associated with all of these people. It was beautiful weather, no matter where you looked. People were everywhere. And then when they left, it was gone. And so our experience was different here in that the tragedy of 9/11 really for Gander was the story of 9/12. It was what we had to do to take care of all these individuals. And when that energy left, we kind of lost something. So there was this sorrow to see all our friends go.
And it happened so quickly. I mean, you have this compressed time where you're trying to make everything work and welcome all of these people, take care of them, getting to know them, and then suddenly you've got to find ways to get them going because pressures to get back home. Brian, what was that like for you?
I've heard the line deafening silence used so many times because we were go, 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 go. No time for yourself. You didn't have time. You were doing this, doing that, doing this, getting this ready, and their needs were yours, and yours had to sit in the background. And then as quickly as they arrived, they left.
Gone.
And now all of a sudden you went to these crowded places for 5 days, and now it seemed emptier than before. And the silence was absolutely deafening. It was hard to get your head around because you reverted blip right back to where you were.
Right, and I guess there's sort of a collective sigh of relief, but also, oddly enough, a sense of we're going to miss them.
Yeah, and we thought that was going to be it. We thought that once they left, the story was done, and it wasn't. It continues to resonate. We never thought that there would be any attention brought to us or what happened that day, and it just continues as a legacy piece.
Now you mentioned legacy, Gina, and what's very interesting about this is, of course, the story of what happened here in 9/11 that does continue to go on. And what happened here is being taught in some very interesting and unlikely places around the world. That's coming up after the break. Welcome back. I'm Anthony Germain. Well, when we think back to 9/11, it's very difficult to imagine back then that any kind of event would eclipse what happened, and yet here we are living in a global pandemic. And yet, despite this pandemic, the legacy of what happened in Gander in this province, it lives on in many, many other countries. And we're going to go now to a school near Houston, Texas, where some people who weren't even born when 9/11 happened are still learning about it.
September 11th, the day before, was just like a normal day, right?
My name is Madison Hughes. I teach 6th and 7th grade English as a second language at Beck Junior High in Katy, Texas. And I got interested in teaching about what happened in Newfoundland when I was in New York City in 2018, seeing the performance Come From Away.
Okay, dream big. Yeah, but what does it mean? Like, you can do what? Hi, my name is Megan Crows. I teach 7th grade at Davila Middle School in Bryan, Texas. I actually got interested in Gander and 9/11 from my best friend Madison, who does this project with me. She has always been big into Broadway and musicals, and for the longest time I gave her a very hard time about this. And for my birthday one year, she took me to see a musical, and from then on I was hooked and decided that I loved this story and we wanted to incorporate it into our classroom.
We're trying to hit as many of those teaching standards as we can with this project. So it's really exciting to bring in pieces of Come From Away with drama, bring in personal narratives of people who have written books or spoken publicly about their experiences in Gander. We love to show our kids as much as we can with this project and to get them to see the bigger picture. They are much easier to insert themselves into the story and become a come from away, as most of them weren't born in the United States. Most weren't born, well, all of them weren't born
when 9/11 happened.
When it happened. So we really try to engage them through that, and it just takes on a mind of its own.
But that's what happened, right? They opened their homes to this idea of kindness.
From this project, I think what was most important for our students to learn was, you know, everybody is different, and when there are hard times in your life, you can't let those differences define you. You need to come together and help those people, show a lot of compassion, show a lot of kindness. Just don't be afraid to, you know, ask a neighbor if they need a helping hand. I would say that's one of the biggest things that I would love for my kiddos to take away from all this. When we started this, you know, we didn't really know what we were going to do with it. You know, we were brainstorming one night and we were like, you know, how can we make this a grade? How can we like bring this full circle? And somehow got on the subject of, hey, one of the teaching standards is a friendly letter, and kind of turned into, well, why don't we have our kids, you know, write a letter? And then it became, well, who are we going to write a letter to? And
without knowing that the people of Gander in Town Hall keep all of the letters in a binder. We knew none of
that.
We knew none.
We tell everybody who will ask us about this, our students drive this project. You know, they're the ones who came up to us and were like, hey, Miss Crows, Miss Hughes, we want to send our letters. We want to see what happens. So, I mean, we just taught it, and that's really, you know, that's really all we can take credit for.
Dear people of Gander, thank you so much for what you did on September 11, 2001. They were really kind to the people, even though they didn't know them. They really needed something positive that day. For example, when we learned the story, my first thought was we were gonna learn the negative thing, but when Miss Hughes started with the slides and saying like kindness is the good thing that happened, I would say that, yeah.
I would like to thank you again for what you did last year for us, and thank you for what you did on 9/11/2001. It's just a period of time where we really need to learn good things or good attitudes to know like how to act in the future. It would help us know how to communicate with each other and be kind and choose the right path.
I think we have like 9 different countries in our classroom, in one room in a building. And I can't remember who said it, but they were like, yo, this is like a mini Gander, right?
In Gander, there were 95, I think, languages spoken in those 5 days that the Plain people were there. They didn't have enough time to learn the language to be able to communicate with everyone, but they were able to show these people through actions and through gestures and words that, you know, you're welcome here, you're safe here. We are celebrating that you are with us, and they didn't have to use a specific language to do that. I think so many of those traits and little lessons along the way really go far.
Okay, if you participated during 6th grade.
From what I see, they really put themselves in the shoes of the Plain people. A lot of my kids remember that first day on American soil when they too were dropped in a place where they couldn't speak the language. They didn't know what people were saying to them. They know that feeling, and so they really pour their hearts out with these letters because it's almost like the kids were there and they know how it feels to be welcomed by someone, to be seen by someone, and they really take this project on themselves, and they are so proud, so excited to be a part of it.
It really changed the dynamic of my classroom culture. I mean, suddenly my students are quoting, you know, well, what would the people of Gander do if, you know, maybe somebody wasn't being the kindest kid in class? Or, using Mayor Claude and Captain Beverly Bass as their helps examples in their essays that they would write, bringing in that historical knowledge into their writing. So I think for me, I was kind of mind blown of like, wow, they took this story and they ran with it, and it didn't stop after we taught it. It kept going in everything that we did.
So there you have, interesting, the very start of the school year in the United States. They're actually talking about this place and where we are right now. Brian, you're an educator for more than 3 decades.
More than 3 decades, 31 years, yeah.
What are your thoughts about something like this?
It's so amazing, and I've always loved seeing the extras being done in the classroom, and these 2 teachers that we just watched are doing that, you know, and they're showing through doing the extras an appreciation for what happened. It's also nice to see that, you know, what this town and the people in this town and surrounding areas did is something that you'd want to teach to kids as, you know, something that was really, really nice. Obviously, that wasn't going through our heads 20 years ago. But now, when it has become a part of something they want to learn about, it's amazing to see it being taught in schools so far away.
It's also interesting that given the way teachers might approach 9/11 in the United States, that there's one place where there's a focus outside, because one might think, you know, that the focus would be on the horrible things that happen in New York and Washington. Gina, what are your thoughts?
I can't express the pride I feel watching something like that. As a Newfoundlander and Labradorian, and try not to get emotional, but the people here are amazing. We've eked out centuries of living on this rock by facing either man-made or natural disasters, by coming together. And to see something like that and realize that we as a people are being held up as an example for children. As a mom, I tell my kids every day, well, not every day, but frequently, I say, try to make this world a better place because you're in it. And those teachers are doing that. And we're being held up as an example of that. It's beyond words.
And I think also during this time of the global pandemic, so many of us have been stressed, not feeling ourselves, the anxiety, you know, some people call it plague fatigue. And yet when you look back at this, there's actually something for people in Gander, and actually all Canadians, to actually feel good about how we responded to this horrible, dark day when the United States was hurt so badly. Brian?
It's amazing what kindness can do and how far the word of your kindness will travel, you know, and it's so easy to do, and it's free, you know, a smile, a hug, letting somebody know you care about them. And I think that was the basis where we started that day.
It's easy to do, but it's hard in this time, because never, I think, in so many years has there been such a divide. So kindness like that can just make such a difference in human connection.
Yep. Now, you noticed in that story as well, there were kids in that class from all over the world. Well, Gander's face has changed a bit in 20 years with other people coming here because of kindness.
My name is Talal Ibrahim. I came with my family from Turkey to Canada in 2016, just in September. So it's now 5 years. I lived in Homs in Syria, and in 2011 the revolution started, and I call it revolution because people were protesting against the president, and after that it turned to be war, and it was really very ugly war. So I left Syria in 2015. We reached to the point, me and my wife, you know, we can't handle it anymore. We were in the area were under government control, but it isn't safe, you know, the mortars was falling every day. When we came to Canada as refugees, we were seeking for a place of safe, you know, safe country, a peaceful country, and we find all that in Canada. When I arrived to Gander, after 2 months, they have this show, Come From Away, and we were invited, and I didn't have any idea what it's about, and I just realized that it's about the passenger who landed in Gander airport and who were received very welcome by the people of Gander. And the experiment repeated itself after 20 years when people of Gander received us too. They were very kind, they were very friendly with us. When you walk on the street, you know, you see everyone saying hi to you, you know, and if you are in trouble, and for example, you're stuck in snow in the street, you will find many people who are ready to help you. So I'm so proud to be a member of Gander Town. We have friends here in Gander, they have cabin, and they invited us in summer. So I tried how to live in cabin, and it was fantastic. I tried the quad for the first time. Oh my God, I love it. So I go to the mud, to the lake. You know, we love it. The kids love it too. The first year was really difficult for us to adjust it, to adjust with it, and get settled. But now, if I go to St. John's, for example, I spend a few days. I want to come back home. So I considered Gander my home. So, yeah, I think I will live here for more than expected.
It's time to conclude our special coverage of 9/11 20 years later with some final thoughts from my guests. Gina, what are you thinking about as we conclude?
Although it's been 20 years, I think it's really important for us to remember that for first responders, survivors of 9/11, there are people still in a lot of physical and emotional pain. And I think it's important for them to realize that we're still thinking of them, even as you face these things and continue with this, our hearts are with you.
And you're talking about people not just in the United States, but also people here, right?
Absolutely. There are Canadians, I believe it was 22 Canadians that died that day. There are families still very much impacted in Canada that are living this. Every 9/11, they go through all of the feelings and the emotions that they experienced that day. And I think it's important that while we remember in this special the love and kindness that took place, that it was born out of tragedy, and it's important that that's never forgotten.
Right. Brian?
It's still hard to get your head around the fact that it has been 20 years, 2 decades since all this happened. What was current affairs is now modern history. The oldest student in school would not be born for another 2 years when this happened. And, that's a long, long time ago. But at the same time, for those of us that were here on the ground, the memories are fresh, they're vivid. You relive moments when you think back and they're there and they're just as fresh as the day they happened. And, not realizing where all this was going to go. Certainly we never had time 20 years ago. It's pretty amazing where all this has taken all of us, and the sense of pride and good feeling that you feel for the place where you live and the surrounding areas.
It's almost also reminds me a bit of Remembrance Day in a sad sense that some of the people who really helped out 20 years ago, they're not here today. And I noticed going around, people are talking about what their pop did, what their nan did. And so many of the people who were there, as you point out, Brian, I mean, this is actually fading into a historic event and not a contemporary one.
I think it's also interesting to consider that children like my first 2 children who were here but don't remember anything about it or don't know about it. And it's really our responsibility to make sure that we tell those stories, we keep it fresh, and they understand how pertinent it is in today's world to keep those lessons a part of their lives.
An important reminder, as I think we've made in the special, that almost like Pearl Harbor or the Kennedy assassination, this is one of those days, if you're our age, you remember it, but there's a generation for whom this was not a memory.
That's right.
I want to thank you both so much for helping us this evening as we look back at 20 years ago. Thank you both very much for being here.
Thank you. And
Thank
Anthony,
you.
we always have the kettle on if you ever want to come here.
I'll be back. So that's pretty much it for our special. I really hope that you've taken away some inspiration from some of the stories that you've seen tonight. It was a remarkable day, and as horrific as it was, there was also some humanity to think about as we look back. Now, some Americans have asked us here in Newfoundland, why would you let perfect strangers into your house for any reason? And when you talk to people in central Newfoundland and ask that question, they will tell you it's just what we do. I'm Anthony Germain. Thank you so much for watching this evening. We're going to leave you now with some thank yous from friends that were made 20 years ago.
Hi from Reno, Nevada. My name is Kelly Russell, and I was on United Flight 929 on September 11th, 20 years ago.
Well, greetings from Auckland, New Zealand. My name is Elias Canaris, and I was on United Airlines Flight UA 929.
Hi, my name is Carrie, and I was flying from Dublin, Ireland to Newark, New Jersey on September 11th.
Hello, my name is Stephen Brecker.
and on 9/11 I was on Virgin Atlantic flight VS21.
Hi, my name is Lynn. I'm from Glasgow in Scotland. I was travelling by myself to Chicago when I landed in Gander.
We're Billy, Beth, and Deanna Wakefield from Tennessee. And we were on day 26 of our adoption trip on September 11th of 2001. And just before U.S. airspace, we were diverted to Gander.
I felt then, as I do now, that on that day we experienced the worst and the best of humanity. And 20 years later, all I want to say is thank you, Gander.
I think of you often. You treated us with utmost kindness and opened your homes and your hearts to us, and for that I deeply, deeply thank you.
And they didn't care about color, religion, and anything. They just were there to help.
If it wasn't for you giving up your time, giving up your food and your homes to us, we would have crumbled.
In amongst all the craziness, all I can ever remember feeling was safe and looked after.
In some ways, obviously it was the worst time for everybody, but they made a bad time much better for us, so we really do appreciate everything.
Anyone I meet till this day, I always tell them the story about my time in Glenwood and in Gander and how fabulous the people were. And I still get choked up thinking about the kindness that was shown to me. And I just want to say thank you to everyone in Gander and Glenwood.
Thanks for everything.
We appreciate you so much. Bye for now.
Your kindness and generosity has never been forgotten.
Thank you so much, and take care.